For today's critical thought, we are talking the very challenging topic of game feel, and why if you're an indie developer watching this, regardless of the genre you're working in, there's a good 90% chance that you have failed on this particular topic. And no, I will not apologize for the cursed image of today's thumbnail. We should probably start a counter for the number of times I'm going to be saying the word feel in today's video. But this is something that is very nebulous in terms of a discussion, as it hits a lot of different points we've talked about before. UI, UX, approachability, accessibility, playability, all the abilities that are out there. And game feel is one of those aspects that it varies from genre to genre, game to game, whether you are making a match 3 puzzle game to a open world grand strategy 4X light gun visual novel roguelike. But the reason why this is one of the harder aspects of game design, especially very hard when it comes to indies and new developers, is that it is the one thing that you can't really kind of get while you're in the middle of developing a game. This is where we talk about the importance of playtesting and being able to study and examine other games that are out there. Now, feel in this respect is something that kind of affects, or it can be seen the most from the new player's perspective. The very worst thing that can happen to you as a developer in this respect is you show your game to someone or a playtester, they pick up the controller, they start moving around, and all of a sudden their face goes like this. And I'm bad making reaction YouTuber face. But yeah, any of the YouTuber reaction faces, if they make that while they're playing your game, that is a bad sign for you. And one of the easiest traps that a lot of designers fall into when it comes to feel in this respect is when we start seeing the genre combos. This is a horror RPG, racing match 3, visual novel platformer, RPG platformer, musical-based platformer. A lot of people have used like platforming and horror in particular as the foundation for a genre combination. As I talk about in my book on platforming design, platforming is one of the most heavily used genres when it comes to new developers and students because it's something that's been almost universally known at this point. So a lot of people think that it's incredibly easy to work in. But you see, feel is very much a part of this. And it's something that you can easily mess up on if you're not paying attention, if you're not having people look at your game. You see, when you're doing genre combinations in particular, both genres, in terms of their positive qualities, have to be front and center. Because remember, if you're taking a platforming shooter, for instance, you need to make sure that your platforming is as on point as your shooting. And if either one of those systems feels wrong, then the entire game kind of falls apart. And this is something that I see from a lot of new or first-time developers, where they'll have this like very high-level, galaxy brain idea for their game. You go to play it, and it's just a mess in terms of how do the controls work? What am I doing? Why does the screen have 75 different colored circles? And what do they all mean? And again, feel applies to your GUI. It applies to anything that the player is interacting with. And as another aspect of good feel, this is where the moment-to-moment and the very first few minutes of someone playing your game comes in. Because you see, here's that dirty little truth. It doesn't take hours to understand the feel of a game. It doesn't take minutes. You can figure this out within maybe 20 to 30 seconds of the game actually starting. Because if you start your game and the very first thing it feels horrible to play, that's it. Because here's again that very salient point. Feel doesn't go away. You can get used to things. You can become accustomed to them. And this is oftentimes why the new player's perspective is so important for playtesting. Because as a good analogy for when people become too kind of wrapped up or they can't see the forest for the trees, it's kind of like that person who has a car or some kind of vehicle that they've had for years. They have grown up with it. And you tell them that it's not working right, or they'll say, well, the steering wheel is a little loose, or the brake pads don't exactly work. But, this is my baby. I've had this for so long, I can't get rid of it. And this is a common what we see when kind of expert players internalize issues when it comes to onboarding and playability in a game that they love. They don't see it as a problem, so surely it's not. And all those new people, they don't understand the game, they need to get good, and other things we've heard time and time again. But you see, if your game is bad from the get-go for a new player, that is going to cause a massive churn. And this is why feel matters. Because at the end of the day, if you got 100,000 copies of your game sold, and I know a few of you probably would kill to get that for your game, but if, let's say, of those 100,000 copies, 5% of the player base actually played more than 30 minutes of your game, that's not a good metric. And part of what makes feel important is that it kind of correlates to player engagement. As I just said a second ago, if of 100,000 people who bought your game, only 5,000 actually have played your game more than a few minutes, if you go into your next title and think, oh, if my last game sold 100,000 copies, then this one will surely sell 300,000 copies. And I just caused a lot of developers to start weeping openly with that sentence. It's not going to happen. And you see, feel is one of those aspects that it is the hallmark of a great designer, and more importantly, it's one of the ways that you can grow as a developer. Like we've said, the chance that your first game is going to be the next Vampire Survivors, next Minecraft, next Factorio, next Slay the Spire, and all that is very, very low. But you are given some amount of leeway when it comes to the feel and playability of a game as a new developer. What you don't want is to still be making those problems, still having those issues 2, 4, 7, 10 games down the line. Because each time that your game is not improving, you are losing potential consumers. People aren't going to be interested in playing your game if it has the same problems that were pointed out 3 games ago. And speaking about multiple games, this is the other point about feel. To go back to what I said about having genre combos and stuff like that, when you move from genre to genre, the feel dramatically changes. And this is why, as a developer, you need to, shockingly, study a lot of video games. Because if you are a really great RPG designer and you think, well, if I'm good at making RPGs, then surely that will translate to, I don't know, a FPS, a high-speed ultra kill like. It is not going to work like that. And one of the ways that we see even veterans in the industry tend to struggle is when they switch genres or studios switch genres. Because if you don't understand the do's and don'ts of the new genre you're working in, all your credibility, all your prestige, all your clout in that other genre means absolutely nothing. And if you think that you can will a game into being or fit that square peg into a round hole, it doesn't work. As we've seen with cases like Anthem, being probably one of the bigger examples over the last few years. I'm sure there's plenty more in the indie and AA space as well. And as a developer, the feel of your game is something that people who are new to your title, as I said, are going to be the most receptive to this. As a point for me, one thing that drives me up a wall when it comes to the feel of the game is trying to play a traditional roguelike, where you have to move one step at a time. You have to hit like a combination of keys just to get your character like turn or walk diagonal. And it's why, like, outside like the Sharon the Wanderer series, that I typically don't like to play traditional roguelikes or mystery dungeon games. And I brought up that point for a very important reason. Because I'm going to use my, I think Jonathan or Joseph Joestar, I think that's right, powers here, to tell you what someone is going to be writing in the comments down below right now after I said that about traditional roguelikes. They're going to say something along the lines of, but Josh, if all the fans of insert genre like this or don't mind this, then what's the problem? Why should I care about someone who's not playing the genre, who's not a super active member of it? And you see, the point about Feel is that this is how you best grow your consumer base and your reach outside your niche audience. One of the most important aspects about being a developer today than it was 15, 20 years ago is that even the smallest or the nichiest games no longer just exist in an echo chamber. Thanks to Twitch streamers and YouTubers and people who will just play any video game that gets sent to them, you never know when a fresh set of eyes is going to look at your game. And this is how you grow your marketing as a developer. That you want people to be talking about your game. You want them to be able to have this amazing experience, whether they have followed you for years or they just found you randomly. Or even if just a consumer looks at some random YouTube video and goes, hey, that game looks kind of weird, let me check it out. Because if you want to grow as a developer, you need to grow your consumer base. And again, there are some games that have existed and they've thrived off of being very niche experiences. But if you're trying to build a company, if you're trying to build a long-term development studio, you want the number of people interested in your game to obviously keep going up and up and up. Not down, down, or they just stay perfectly the same from game to game. Because if you're not growing, it means that you have a very limited number of audience or number of consumers who will be wanting to play your next game. And if they decide not to play it, then you're going to be even more behind the eight ball. And it's also, again, why it becomes very risky when we see developers kind of double down and say, well, if my first game sold 500,000 copies, then the goal for my next game is 6 million copies. And again, I just caused someone to have a heart attack watching this. Now, here's the other point about Feel and why I wanted to make this video for today. For the last, 13 and a half minutes or so of this video, we've been talking about Feel when it comes to reflex-driven games. Your action games, platformers, shooters, games where Feel is very one-to-one. I press the jump button, the character jumps. I wiggle the left analog stick, my character wiggles. Here's the other point about Feel. It also applies to abstracted and turn-based games. Yes, even if you are making a city builder, a JRPG, even if you're just literally making an idle game and everyone's just watching numbers all around your screen, game Feel still applies. Because just as you can make it exciting for a character to walk, jump, move, shoot, handstand, backflip, whatever. Because, as we've said before, Nintendo has their Feel down. They can make Mario walking, jumping in an empty room feel exciting and magical. But if you're working on a turn-based game, you need to make it as exciting to push a button, watch a graph go up, watch numbers go up, watch them go down, watch numbers go sideways. I don't know. But the point is that Feel is universal. The methodology and philosophy around it differs from genre to genre. But if someone is having trouble getting into your turn-based game, or the feeling is just off in it, guess what? That's going to even be more damning. Because if it's a pain to control a character in a turn-based RPG with random encounters, well, guess what? How many random encounters are they going to have to sit through from beginning to end? So what do we mean by Feel in terms of abstracted and turn-based design? There's two actual points I want to talk about. The first is kind of the fidelity or the impact of pressing buttons. So what I mean by this is that it should feel good to push a button. Some games have that little sound effect plays. Maybe when you are ready to go, animations play. Darkest Dungeon and Darkest Dungeon 2 are really good examples of that kind of fidelity. That it is just two teams on one side, or one team over here, one team over there. They're fighting each other in the middle. But how they create the impact and the visceralness of watching these characters smack each other, bleed, blight, DOTs, debuffs, Wayne June talking gravely in the background, all that adds up to make it exciting to watch. That it's not just, a stick figure and a stick figure going like this for 5 minutes. And it's why we've seen from a lot of turn-based designers over the last decade a greater emphasis on action cams, zooming in, making it feel exciting to watch this stuff play out. How many of you have played one of the XCOM games of Firaxis and seen the action cam as it zooms in on your character shooting and the shot misses at a 99% chance and then the sectoid one-shots your squatty? And I brought up XCOM for another reason. The other aspect of feel when it comes to abstracted design is making your game feel snappy to play. And snappy is another very nebulous term when it comes to feel. But it's this idea that combat is very gratifying and it's very transparent in terms of what is going on in your game. So this is when we once again bring back UI, UX, and GUI design into our discussion. That one of the issues that a lot of strategy games have had is providing relevant and important information to the player. That, okay, my character is here, the enemy's over there. If I move somewhere, or if I do something, what does that mean? And here's a very fun point, or a do not. The very popular of, if I want to check the attack range or what my attack's going to do, I need to go to each and every spot on the field before the game actually shows me unit prediction or battle predictions. This will drive someone up a wall or jump out the window. And one of the things that we saw from kind of modern strategy games or modern turn-based games along these lines is now it's dynamic. As I move my mouse or my cursor around the screen, I am immediately given, okay, I have a 70% chance, 72, 73, 74, 60, 50, 40. This is where there's a critical shot. This is where the enemy can see me. This is where they can't see me. It's very easy and it's very immediate, the information that the player is given. You don't ever want the player to have to go menus deep in order to figure out anything with your game. Here's another point about it, and this actually gets back to reflex-driven for a second, but have you ever played an exploration-heavy game where there is no mini-map or hotkey for mapping functionality, and the only way that you can see where you're at in the world is you must go 2 to 3 menus deep in order to view the map each and every time? And if you're someone working on a game and you have that in your title, change it. Please, change it. And as another good example of kind of how snappiness and responsiveness can really help a game, Persona Tactia and Mario plus Rabbids are two XCOM-likes that play nothing like XCOM, XCOM lowercase, XCOM capital, or Phoenix Point. They are designed as console experiences first, and because of that, they were designed around a gamepad. So they had to basically completely rebuild the GUI and the UI UX around a squad-based, turn-based strategy game. And both games do a phenomenal job of it. Persona in particular, going back to Persona 5, is also really great in terms of its GUI. It has its own like unique cell shading. It pops when you're going to menus. That's another good point about feel. If your game like visibly pops and it feels alive and interesting while you are just looking at the health and mana points of your team, then you are on the right track. And with Mario and Persona in this respect, instead of you having to like slowly move a character again, click on a character, go to the area, click again. When you're selecting a character, they just move around on the map and nothing gets locked in until you confirm that action. And here's again that other point about feel and onboarding and all that we've talked about many times before. Good feel is very simple to the consumer. It's not simple as a designer to build, playtest, and iterate on. But when you do it right, most people, again, consciously will not realize it. When you do it wrong, they are going to verbally understand it, and they will tell it to you, and shout it to you, and type it to you any which way they can. And again, this is why this stuff matters. Because at the end of the day, if your game feels good to play, if the moment to moment of your game is exciting and snappy and dynamic and any other adjectives and buzzwords we can fit in, this retains people far longer. To go back to the point I said about your hardcore fan base, your hardcore fans are willing to put up with issues. They are willing to stay through your game thick and thin. This is the audience when we talk about the 0.0065% of the people who played your game who did 100%. They played on the highest possible difficulty. They beat your game in 40 minutes or less. They are the gods at your title. But I just said that was like, what 0.07% of the people who have bought that game. Your goal, when it comes to feel, onboarding, and everything that we've said here today, is to keep your churn rates from spiking almost immediately. Again, there is no video game in the world or will ever be made that has 100% completion rate by the consumers. What you don't want again is to go from 100 to 42 to 5 within 40 minutes of your game starting up. If you can slow that rate down, if you can get most of your people and people who played your game past your tutorial or past the first major challenge, that's good. You want people to leave your game satisfied. Whether they left it after they just completed the game on story mode, they've 150%ed your game, maybe they only played your game halfway through and felt, okay, I've seen it, okay, and I'm going to give up and move on to something else. That is all legitimate, and it's, again, very expected consumer behavior. But when you're able to retain the consumers, and they play your game, and they want to see you succeed, this is how you build a healthy consumer base. The people who will go out and shout from the rooftops about how great your game is, and they'll mention it on social media, and more eyes will get on it. And if you can keep improving from game to game, from genre to genre, this is how you build a very stable consumer base. And more importantly, this is when we see studios become more of a brand than their games. So examples of this would be studios like Kit Fox Games, Clay Entertainment, where Clay can announce literally anything. Doesn't matter what the genre is, doesn't matter the name of it. They announce they're working on a new game and everyone's ears perk up. The same thing we say about Nintendo again. And when you reach that level as a studio, as a developer, this is where you can really start to do incredible things with your games. And again, there are people, over the course of it, I've talked about how new designers and new developers tend to be the ones who struggle with this. But there are exceptions to this. We have played games from first-time developers or a student project or anything like that where, for their very first game, it feels really damn good. And it's because they have studied the genre. They have played all the good examples, they've played all the bad examples, and game feel in this respect is a way as a new developer that you can punch higher than your weight class. In some cases. Again, the advantage of being a AAA studio is that you have all the money and resources to do all the playtesting, refining, and iterating that you want. But one of the things that we see from a lot of AAA developers, or people who go from AAA to indie, when they lose those resources and they're forced to make a new game on their own, feel, aesthetics, onboarding tend to be an area that they have trouble with. Because if it's not something that you have been actively thinking about, actively building in your game, you can't just flip that switch and just, toggle the UI UX button on Unity or Unreal and the game builds the entire GUI for you. Oh, and does all the playtesting as well. That's a bonus feature. It's hidden in the Unreal editor somewhere. And as a new developer, we've played games that feel really great in their hands. And again, this is why feel is oftentimes most associated to reflex-driven games. If you've spent your entire life studying platformers, playing platformers, thinking about building platformers, and then you decide to make one, you probably have a really good idea as to how it feels to jump, how it feels to walk, and double jump, and slide jump, and wall jump, and all the other jumps in the world. But like I said in the second half of this discussion, feel applies to abstracted games. It applies to a game where all you have is party over here, party over there, and a kind of little command menu right there. All these things add up. When you do them right, it can lead to more people being interested in your game. When you do it wrong, or you don't do it as far enough as you should, it will lead to people just falling out of interest. If something annoys them, they don't have to play your game. They don't have to muscle through a bad game anymore. As I've been talking for the last almost 30 minutes, there's a good chance that at least 20 to 30 video games have been released on the very day that you are watching this video, no matter when you are viewing this on the channel. And if something doesn't catch your eye in your game, they'll go to any of the other ones that will. So for those of you watching this, can you think of really great examples of game feel that have elevated a game or managed to kind of hide or mitigate any other problems with a title? And can you think of examples of feel that have absolutely, without a doubt, failed and ruined a game that was so bad, so frustrating to play that you lost any and all desire, no matter what else was in this game, to give it a shot? That's going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to do the YouTubing stuff people tell you to do. If you're interested in more of my thoughts on design, check out my books wherever they are sold. Visit our Discord and Patreon, and come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where you some of the art and science of games.